so-called gas. My name is Frédéric Simon. I'm the Energy and Environment Editor of Euractiv, and I will have the pleasure of moderating today's event, which is titled, How can the gas infrastructure sector develop low-carbon and renewable solutions? Now, why are we talking about this today? Well, the key element of context here is the European Green Deal and plans that are currently shaping up at the EU level to implement some new tougher climate targets for 2030 in view of reaching climate neutrality by 2050. And in this context, the role of gas as an energy carrier is raising a lot of attention at political level, not least because the European Commission is preparing to table a new regulatory framework for gas in June this year that will cover the coming decade. So what can be the role of gas in a fully decarbonised economy? And how can Europe make the best use of existing gas infrastructure to minimise the cost of the transition? To discuss this topic today, we have the pleasure of welcoming two sets of speakers for an event that will be divided into two parts. First, a CEO panel with the leaders from the four companies that I mentioned before, and then a policy panel with speakers from the EU institutions as well as civil society and the gas industry. One last point for our viewers, you're welcome to send your questions to the panelists using the Ask button on Vimeo, and I will make sure to pick a selection of those questions later on during the debate. I think that's all for me, so without further ado, let me introduce our CEO panel, starting with Catherine Leboul-Proust, Strategy Director at GRDF, Pierre Duvieuzard, Deputy CEO of GRT Gaz, Éric Lachance, President and CEO of Énergir in Quebec, Canada, and Mariam Brown, President of So-Called Gas, the gas company in Southern California. Now, thanks to all of you for joining us today. And let me start straight away with a general question to all of you. We've seen Europe, Canada, and recently the United States all signing up to the objective of reaching net zero emissions by 2050. So what changes, in your view, will be needed from the gas sector to reach this objective? And what will be your contribution as a company to make this transition happen? Catherine Leboul-Proust, you have the privilege of starting first.
Thank you very much, Frédéric. Good afternoon, all. I'm very delighted to be there and beside our colleagues from GRT, Énergir, and So-Called Gas. Today I represent GRDF, which is in Europe the largest natural gas distribution network. And for the exchange, I will just highlight three key points of our business model. First point is that our first specificity of our business model is that we have a customer portfolio based on individual and small-sized business clients. The second specificity of our business model is that we operate the network on behalf of local authority. They own the network. And the third specificity of our business model is that we have to meet a double requirement. First, public services missions such as security, continuity of supply, and tariff equalization. And we have to combine this public service mission with cost performance to keep competitive and our customers satisfied. So what is today our contribution to this goal of carbon neutrality? Today we play an active role, and this role can be bigger more and more in the time and can be bigger tomorrow. It lies on the traditional 3G combined to decarbonize, to digitalize, and to decentralize. I just have a focus on decarbonization. I think our distribution network can play an active role in decarbonization in two ways, in two mitigations. First, in mitigating energy consumption by the promotion of high efficiency appliance and by the rollout of smart metering solution. For instance, we are rolling out in France a massive smart metering program over 11 million clients, and it's associated with promise of demand side management. Second, in mitigating the use of carbon intensive fuels, and this works first with natural gas, with fossil gas in replacement of coal and fuel oil. And then we can go further by replacing fossil gas by renewable gas. And as far as GRDF is concerned, the first step for us is with biogas, biomethane, which divides by 10 the carbon emissions. So the impact is immediate on the carbon footprint. So this change, this shift to renewable gas has begun in France, and it's going very fast with a high rate of development. And besides carbon footprints, it's important also to say that local authority expect from this renewable gas multiple other local benefits, such as increased value of organic waste, long-term creation of local jobs, and use of organic rather than chemical fertilizer. And as an example, the French government has urged a study to assess the value of these additional services by renewable gas to the environment, so that they can be considered in the global cost of renewable gas. So as a conclusion, reducing the demand, using natural gas in replacement of oil and coal, and promoting renewable gas.
Thank you very much. Let me turn now to Pierre Duviezard. Your perspective on the decarbonisation debate is slightly different, of course, because you come from the infrastructure point of view. So tell us, how are you preparing for the transition to net zero emissions at GRT Gaz?
Good afternoon, Frederic, and good afternoon, everyone. One of the objectives of this webinar and panel is, of course, to highlight the fact that the gassing sector and that our 4 different companies are committed to the net zero emission target by 2050, and also that we have solutions to propose. Today, GRT Gaz is the main transmission and LNG terminal operator in France, with about 3/4 of the transmission network and 3 LNG terminals on both the Mediterranean and Atlantic coasts. And our subsidiary, GRT Gas Deutschland, operates the mega transit pipeline between eastern and western borders of Germany. Over the past years, and until quite recently, our main priority was to contribute to the creation of the European internal gas market, which progressively became more diverse, more secure, and security of supplies is an important issue, and of course, more competitive. We think this goal has been reached to the benefit of the European customers. For us, it meant significant investments in the infrastructure and in the development of connections with our neighboring countries. Now, today, we have an additional target with the European Green Deal. Sustainability and the do not harm principle become prevalent in the political debate. Achieving climate neutrality is a new step and also a real paradigm shift for the gas industry and our companies. In this shift, we, GRT Gaz, anticipate to transport declining quantities of natural gas, of course. But we are also convinced that in combination with renewable electricity, renewable gases like hydrogen and biomethane will play a major role in achieving this net zero emission target in an affordable and socially acceptable way. Our infrastructure, which clearly is today a strategic asset for France, but also for Europe, will continue to be a cornerstone for the future energy system. On one side, while transporting decreasing quantities of natural gas, we will be making way for increasing quantities of renewable and decarbonised gases. These will be particularly necessary for sectors where decarbonisation will be hard to achieve, processes that require high temperature heat or steam, or in the chemical and steel industry, or also for heavy road mobility or rail mobility. On another side, using the existing gas infrastructure together with electricity in a hybrid system will provide a smart and cost-efficient solution for achieving EU decarbonisation objectives. Indeed, with the scale-up of intermittent renewable electricity production, biomethane today and hydrogen tomorrow can provide an efficient storage and flexibility solution to the electricity system. So our contribution today as a company, as GRTgaz, is to work on the implementation of these renewable and low carbon gases. This means working on how our current and future network need to adapt to these new gases and markets. We invest in new devices like river flows, in technologies, and modify the way we operate the network, which gets smarter. We also invest in R&D, mainly in hydrogen, and develop new skills for our teams. Finally, we spend more time with our clients and customers and stakeholders, understanding the evolutions of their needs.
Okay, thanks, Pierre Duviosa. Let me turn now to Éric Lachance, President and CEO of Énergir in Quebec. Can you tell us more about the debate on gas decarbonisation in Canada and in Quebec? And what are the solutions that you're proposing from your company's perspective?
Absolutely. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, depending on which side of the ocean you're sitting. Just as a matter of context, Énergir, we are the gas distribution utility in Quebec. We're distributing 97% of the natural gas in Quebec. A big difference, though, is Quebec was fortunate enough to be well endowed with hydroelectricity. So natural gas is only 15% of the total energy that is being consumed in Quebec. And because we have hydroelectricity, we're fortunate enough in Quebec that 99% of that electricity is already green, and it's also cheap. We're talking about 4 to 8 cents per kilowatt-hour. So in terms of customer perspective, Énergir has about 60% more skewed toward the industry sector, about 10% of its volume in the residential sector, and the remaining is in commercial and institutional sector. The way we intend to actually contribute to the decarbonation lies around a few initiatives that we have. First is energy efficiency. This is something that Énergir has been recognized as a leader in the past 20 years for its program in North America, but we want to do in 10 years what we did in the last 20. It's the cheapest way to actually help our customer reduce their footprint. The second aspect is with respect to renewable gases. We have a target of 10% of renewable gases by 2030 to be distributed in our network. And the other one is trying to actually look at where our network provides the most value to the energy system as a whole, not only on the gas perspective, what we call value over volume. So we're currently working with Hydro-Québec, which is the main electricity producer and distributor in Quebec, to actually look at ways to electrify further some part of the economy, but at the same time take advantage of the benefit of our network in terms of managing peaks, so that this transition can be done faster but cheaper also for the customer. So basically our impact is trying as much as possible to help our customer reduce their footprint by energy efficiencies and new low carbon gases initiatives, and at the same time trying to work alongside the other energy providers to reduce the cost of the transition to make it happening faster.
Okay, thanks very much. Marion Brown, you're president of Sokol Gas, the gas company in Southern California. Same question to you, I guess. How is the debate on gas decarbonisation taking shape in Southern California, and what kind of solutions are you putting forward?
Thank you very much, Fred. My name is Marion Brown, and I'm president of SoCalGas. And I'm very pleased to be here with my colleagues from GRDF and GRT Gas and Energir to have this opportunity to join this discussion. We last met all together in Canada about 1.5 years ago, and it's good to be together again. For context, SoCalGas, we are based in Los Angeles, and we are the largest gas distribution utility in the United States. We have approximately 22 million customers from Central to Southern California, and about 90% of our residents use natural gas for heating, hot water, cooking, drying clothes, and other uses. And also, when it comes to providing electricity in California, gas delivered through our company's pipelines plays a key role. About 45% of our electric power generated in the state comes from gas-fired power plants. We have reduced our to almost zero our coal and oil power plant fleet. So very dependent on natural gas there. That is important because we're here today to talk about the essential role that gas infrastructure plays in meeting climate change goals. And not only can the gas system deliver clean molecules such as biomethane and hydrogen, it also supports the resiliency of the power sector. And resiliency is a very important topic in California. As I'm sure that you heard, we experienced terrible wildfires last summer and fall, as well as extreme heat waves in other parts of the country, not in California, but at this time in other parts of the United States, they're experiencing extreme cold. And what we're seeing is that renewables, solar and wind renewable electricity, that intermittency also is very impacted by externalities with weather, and it makes the gas system vital to keeping the lights on during these events. What our analysis is showing is as we have more renewable electricity come onto our grid, and we're very supportive of that. We have approximately 35% of our grid comes from renewable electricity, not quite where they are in Quebec, but we're growing. The demand for the gas grid actually increases over time, doesn't decrease over time. So there's a lot of dialogue about that integration between the gas and the electric grids here. In addition to that work, as has been mentioned by the other panelists, we have a great deal of focus on energy efficiency. SoCalGas has the largest energy efficiency program in the country. We are very encouraged by the progress that we have made on smart meters. I was excited to hear about Catherine's work at GRDF on that front. We were the first gas utility in the United States to install smart meters for our gas system and have had a very positive experience from that. But we also see a very significant need to decarbonize our gas system over time. One piece of that is renewable natural gas, biomethane, and we set a target of 5% of our system by 2022 and 20% of our system by 2030. We are on track to meet our 2022 goal. Much of that renewable natural gas comes from landfill at this time, but increasingly is coming from dairy and agriculture as well as wood waste. And then we have our projects with respect to hydrogen, where we are involved in pilot projects and demonstration projects in every aspect of the energy value chain, from production to transportation to blending. But really long-term, where we see SoCalGas's investments in hydrogen being on the blending side in our gas infrastructure system. So we have projects to test how much of our system can use hydrogen, and we grow and learn a lot by learning from our peers on what they're doing in other parts of the globe, in France, in Asia, in Canada, as we test that tolerance level. So I'll pause there and turn it back to you, Fred.
Thank you, Mariam. So let's talk specifically now about the two main types of gases that we're talking about. You've mentioned them. It's mainly biomethane or hydrogen. The routes for getting those can be quite different. For biomethane, it's mostly linked to agriculture, waste, whereas for hydrogen, there's different ways of obtaining hydrogen from electricity or from natural gas itself, in fact. So can you maybe, each one of you, explain what plans you have for each one of those? Do you place more emphasis on hydrogen or on biomethane? And in terms of the infrastructure, what are the needs there that you've identified in order to support the development of these renewable gases? Is a dual infrastructure, for example, necessary in your view, or can the same infrastructure be used for both? And maybe I can start with you, Catherine Le Boule-Proust. Catherine, I think you're muted.
Okay, sorry. Hi.
Yes, go ahead, we can hear you now.
Yes, great. Thank you, Frédéric. So at GRDF, we have plans for both energies, but with different scales of time. We have a massive ongoing industrial process for injecting biomethane in our grids, and we have research and development program for hydrogen. In France, the government has set up an ambitious goal for renewable gases to a target to have 10% of renewable gases by 2030. And we hope it will be a path to 100% by 2050. But as I told you, GRDF has not many industrial clients, so we don't use hydrogen today. And we have a major, maybe I have focus on biomethane. So to answer your question, in terms of infrastructure developments, and according to our experience, it's quite easy because the technology of biomethane is quite mature in France. And as far as distribution networks are concerned, it requires very low infrastructure developments. Because after quick phases of purification, biomethane can directly be injected into the grids without major investments. And the investments required cover mainly the cost of connections to the grid and adaptation to make it bidirectional. So with reverse flow stations or meshes. So there's no huge infrastructure developments. We have to adapt our grid, but it's quite the technologies and the costs are easily catched. And the second asset of this first renewable gas is that there's no storage issue for biomethane. It can benefit from the existing storage capacity of gas. So that's a good point. So our main issue in France wasn't on investment nor in innovation for biomethane. It was just to create the right legal and the right regulation basis to allow the investments. And it has been done through a right to injection that has been created, and it works. So that's it. I made a focus on biomethane because we work a lot also on hydrogen, but hand in hand with our colleague from the teams of Pierre, And I will let Pierre talk more about hydrogen.
Okay, thank you, Catherine, and we'll talk more as well about some of the policy and regulatory aspects that you touched upon towards the end. So let me turn to you then, Pierre Duvieuzard, the perspective on biomethane and hydrogen from your perspective at GRT Gas. So I understand that your focus is more on hydrogen and less on biomethane.
Well, we focus on both, but maybe this afternoon I will focus on hydrogen, which is today in a very different situation than biomethane. Today, hydrogen is yet neither an energy vector nor a commodity, it's rather a chemical feedstock. But the situation is really changing now. Hydrogen is now seen as the missing link in the energy transition, the link that will allow to integrate more renewables in the energy system, as well as allow a deep and efficient decarbonisation of industry and the transport sector. In France, the authorities published in September an hydrogen strategy with a strong commitment to develop hydrogen with a 7 billion plan by 2030 to install 6.5 gigawatt of electrolyzer capacity. And if we refer to France Hydrogen, which is a professional association, their estimation is that the French demand for hydrogen will reach 110 terawatt hour by 2040. So at this stage, hydrogen would have become a commodity and an organized market will have emerged. What we see in the phasing of this development is that at an early stage, we rather see the development of renewable hydrogen in industrial clusters that would combine locally supply and demand. In this cluster, there would be a need for infrastructures, but there wouldn't be the main issue at that time of the investment. And also in some cases, the hydrogen or surplus hydrogen would be injected and blended in the methane network. This is a way to quickly scale up hydrogen supply while limiting the need for hydrogen pipeline and end user investments. And this would also give access to the producer to a deep energy market. And we are already consulted GRT Gas by some potential producers they ask us if we could accept their hydrogen in our network. Nevertheless, we think that this will probably be limited in time and in amount, more for market reasons than for technical reasons. Sorry. But we also see that at a later stage, we anticipate imports of hydrogen from countries where clean hydrogen will be cheap to produce and exports of hydrogen where there would be a demand. This would be probably a south to north route. So we are convinced that at some stage, a dedicated pure hydrogen network will be required to transport this production locally and for long distance. And this network will allow to connect various producers to various customers to establish a true hydrogen market and to make it a commodity. And we anticipate that the initial cluster networks, but moreover, the conversion of the existing grid, will facilitate the emergence of this network at a very competitive cost.
Thank you, Pierre Duvieuzard. Very quickly, this hydrogen network, by when do you see that taking shape? Is it in the 2020s or in the 2030s?
Probably, maybe we intend to see. We think we'll see clusters initially, then we'll see point-to-point cluster, but it would be rather by 2030.
Yes. Okay, thank you. Let me turn now to you, Eric Lachance. Can you maybe describe what kind of focus you're placing in Quebec? Is it more on biomethane? Is it more on hydrogen? And can you lay out the plans that you have looking ahead also in terms of the infrastructure development there?
Yes, absolutely. I would say that for most of the recent years, the focus has really been on biomethane because it was a more mature technology, obviously, and we wanted to get a faster impact. So in terms of the development of the ecosystem, I would say, obviously, the good news is that the government support is there. We now have regulatory targets of 5% by 2025 and 10% of renewable natural gas in our network by 2030. There's also where Energia has been helpful is by our ability to offer long-term contracts. So that's been very helpful in terms of supporting the ecosystem, in terms of having new producer coming online. With respect to technology, I think Catherine addressed very well the point. It's similar things. It's not much of a challenge. In terms of sourcing the biomethane, in our cases, it's similar. So for, I would say, the first 7-8%, it's going to be tied toward agricultural landfills. It will be with respect to food waste and so on. But obviously, going into a higher volume will require cost improvement on biomethane from forest biomass, which, given the geography of Quebec, we will be well endowed. So it's more a matter of the technology maturing and the cost going down. As with respect to hydrogen, I would say with starting, like most, what we're doing is we have plans to test with respect to blending, see how it impacts our network. Our network is relatively young, but nonetheless, we still have parts of it that is steel, which obviously needs more testing. And also, we are doing testing on the appliance side. The presence of large industrial loads also, which from a technical point of view, the quality and the precision of the gas we're delivering in terms of energy content is very important. It's going to have an impact also on where we can inject hydrogen. So those are the things that we need to further investigate, I would say. The other thing also is where both the provincial government and the federal government are at the early stage of setting up a nitrogen strategy and even a bioenergy strategy. So we also need that input in terms of where we're going to head. Obviously, given what I described in Quebec, we're well endowed with hydro dams, which would improve the economics of green hydrogen if you combine it with intermittent renewable energy. But at the same time, Canada being a big producer of natural gas, we're also well endowed in terms of potential for carbon storage, and as such, blue hydrogen cannot be discounted either. So we'll have to see what kind of Canadian policy and Quebec policy origins in terms of making our bed on what kind of hydrogen and how that's going to impact also the network in the future.
Right, still relatively long term for the time being, if I understand correctly. Mariam Brown, let me turn to you now. Can you maybe expand a little bit on the plans that you have in Southern California to develop whether hydrogen or biomethane, and what that means also in terms of the development of infrastructure?
Thank you very much, Fred, for the question, and I really appreciate the comments from my colleagues on the panel, because there's a lot of similarity between the investments and the things that you were looking at in renewable natural gas and hydrogen that we are here in Southern California at SoCalGas. I really think that this is a very exciting time in the energy industry, because you have the best of the best through the energy value chain and the best of the best around the globe, all working in this common direction of seeking to decarbonize our energy systems, and on the gas side, decarbonize the gas system. With respect to biomethane, RNG, I agree with Catherine's point on the maturity of the technology. It is one that that we know the technology is known, the science is known, and it is already being integrated into our gas system at this time. We have a wealth of potential sources of renewable natural gas. California is the largest dairy state in the country. We are the largest agriculture state in the country, and we are one of the largest landfill states in the country. So that gives the opportunity for fuel from this decomposing waste is very significant here in California. And so, you know, it really is as simple as the projects around interconnecting renewable natural gas into our system is relatively simple. I think the key is finding those clusters, if you will, where it makes economic sense to be drawing those waste resources and feeding it into our gas system. As I said at the initial part of my remarks, we have set a voluntary goal of 5% of our system being comprised of renewable natural gas by 2022 and 20% of our system being renewable natural gas by 2030. I remember when we were together last year, I think that Quebec has set at the government level a requirement, a standard around renewable natural gas. We were jealous in California of that, and we're working with our policymakers here to have a similar standard or requirement for renewable natural gas. I think the issue with renewable natural gas over time is cost, though. There is a limit to how much cost of those projects can come down over time. And I think that that's why there is a lot of excitement around hydrogen, because of the scalability opportunity. Costs can come down significantly over time in a way that renewable natural gas, while it's an important piece of how we solve the problems or the issues that we're facing, the goals that we have set, hydrogen really provides that size and scale that we need to decarbonize over a long period. So the vision around hydrogen really is about that having a more significant role in our system by the end of the decade and into the 2030s, but to be folding in hydrogen into our system in a significant way in 2030, we need to be doing that work now. So what SoCalGas is doing is we are investing in the understanding of the production of hydrogen, and there are a number of different types of hydrogen. There's a color differentiation. You heard it alluded to, I think, by Eric about blue hydrogen, but there is brown, there is gray, there is blue, there is green. SoCalGas is investing in the understanding of all of these different production streams of hydrogen with a lot of excitement for green hydrogen. Obviously, our renewable electricity penetration on our grid is very, very high. I mentioned earlier it's around 35% and set to be 60% by the end of the decade. And while that's very positive, there's an opportunity there with excess renewable penetration at the peaks to be able to convert that to green hydrogen. We see opportunity to invest in an isolated hydrogen system, particularly as it relates to transportation. Fred, I think you were asking about, do we see a dual system, a hydrogen system, and separately a combined system? I think definitely on the transportation side, we see that opportunity for a pure hydrogen system. And I think that there's also an opportunity for the existing methane gas system to be repurposed to carry both hydrogen and natural gas. And we've been investing in our understanding of blending hydrogen and natural gas together. One, what is the tolerance of our system for the amount of hydrogen in our system? And also very significant or very sophisticated technologies that would allow us to extract hydrogen from the methane pipeline system so you can use it in its purest form when you need it in its purest form. I guess the last thing that I'll mention is we're also investing. We have a partner, a Canadian partner, ATCO, that we are developing a hydrogen house project here in Southern California to really demonstrate the capability of homes being able to run on a combination of renewable electricity with hydrogen and fuel cells, and really opening the imagination on the possibilities here.
Okay, thank you, Mariam. We've got 10 minutes until the end of this CEO panel. So let me quickly now move to a question about the usage of hydrogen in certain end-use sectors. Mariam, you mentioned heating for individual households. I think other speakers mentioned as well the need to use hydrogen or biomethane to decarbonize certain industrial sectors. This is something that the European Commission, they've been making proposals about this with a strategy called sector integration strategy, essentially saying or suggesting maybe some particular industrial sectors should be prioritized as users of hydrogen. Mariam, what do you make of that? Does that make sense to you, that some specific sectors of economic activity should be prioritized as users of these scarce resources that we have?
Absolutely. Southern California is the largest manufacturing base in the country, with major industrial players involved across a number of different industries, but including steel, cement, glass manufacturing. These are all very energy intensive businesses. And while electrification, renewable electrification is part of the solution of accomplishing climate change goals, there are certain end uses that electricity cannot provide enough of heat that is needed for those processes. And so that absolutely begs for gas solutions. This is my son, Joey. Joey, not now.
I'm gonna test out this.
Okay, sounds good.
Because I'm mixing glowing to you.
Okay. We're very much still in the stage where our kids are at home this week. So sorry about the interruption.
That was very
but
cute.
I think that, thank you for understanding. So, thank you, Joey. He is 6. So I think that there are definitely end uses on the industrial sector that will absolutely need a gas solution, and having those gas solutions be decarbonized gas solutions, and that drives you to hydrogen as well as renewable natural gas. But because of the scalability hydrogen, that is definitely a focus area of ours here at SoCalGas. And I mentioned the pilot projects that we have on blending. One is hydrogen blending into our residential sector. That is our all plastic pipe system. One is hydrogen blending into our combination steel and plastic system. And the third is the one that is the core of this question of yours, Fred, which is industrial application.
Thanks. Let me turn to Eric Lachance with a view from Canada and Quebec about the end-use sectors. Have you identified any priority end-use sectors for using biomethane or hydrogen when these gases become increasingly available over time?
Well, I agree with Mariam just said in terms of, like I mentioned, we do have 60% overload, which is linked toward heavy industries like steel, paper mills that require a lot of energy. So it does make sense to favor those in the long term, because there's sort of a competitive advantage for hydrogen in those horizons. With respect to natural gas, I guess it's striking to find the right balance, because obviously there are a lot of customers that are more advanced on the curve on how they want to be carbon neutral. So for us, it's important to be able to offer them solutions as soon as possible. Like I said in my introduction, our strategy is more focused toward moving our customers where we think there's long-term value for our network. So maintaining a sustainable competitive advantage in the long term compared to other alternatives on renewable energy. So we're trying to target those sectors. So right now, like given the climate of Quebec, which requires a lot of seasonal storage during the winter, obviously the heating in the building sector is a very important component where I think we will have to play a role in terms of helping the electricity grid meet the need of more electrification, but while we can still earn a decent living addressing it. So that's clearly one of the area where we want to have more renewable natural gas, eventually hydrogen, and a similar approach to what Mariam described in terms of testing for particular market segments. We are doing exactly the same thing today. That's our plan.
Catherine de Boule-Proust, maybe with you to conclude, do you share the views of those others who expressed themselves on the panel saying there should be some priority sectors targeted, some priority end-use sectors targeted for using those renewable gases, which are not yet available in sufficient quantities at this stage to make a significant difference in terms of decarbonisation? Do you share that view? And maybe, and that would introduce the next panel, do you think policymakers should maybe intervene at some point to prioritise some end-use sectors over some other ones?
Well, as a conclusion, I'll just say that I share Mariam and Eric's statements about the use of hydrogen and its use, especially for industrial, who have major industrials who have intensive business models. I think that's a priority for hydrogen. At GRDF, we have just ended a demonstrator grid in Dunkirk where we have tested the blending of hydrogen in our gas network distribution system. We went up to 20% of injection of hydrogen in our network, and it was we tested it on new buildings that could tolerate boilers could tolerate hydrogen easily because everything was new and everything has been done. And I think hydrogen for private clients, small private clients, is much more, it's a much more delicate question for today. It has to be developed on research development programs.
And quickly picking up on a question from the audience with you, Catherine de Boule-Proust, what do you make of the EU's hydrogen strategy, which mainly places the focus on the production of hydrogen from renewable electricity? Is that something that you're pursuing as a company or in partnership with others? I know in France also there's a lot of speculation or talk about production of hydrogen, not from gas, but from nuclear energy. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, we are looking quite carefully, like Mariam in California, the wide range of production of hydrogen, which can be through many colors, and we have a specific look on it. We test at Dunkirk a model of production of hydrogen from electric renewables that couldn't be stored, and I think that's one of the best model. I think we should carry on looking at that model, but other models exist and we have to look also after them, because not only it helps to create new renewable gas such as hydrogen, but also it creates a service that gas networks offer, a flexibility service and a service of storage of the electric system. And I think that's a real asset as far as the sector intercoupling is looked at.
Okay, thanks, Catherine Le Boule-Proust. I wish we had more time to discuss, but unfortunately, we now have to close this conversation and move on to the next panel discussion, which is about policy. Thanks again to all of our speakers for joining us today, especially the two on the other side of the Atlantic. We'll be back in a couple of minutes after a short break. Right, good evening everyone, and welcome to the second part of this online event exploring the role of gas infrastructure in a decarbonised economy. After the CEO panel a moment ago, we're now turning to our policy panel with Katerina Sikov-Magny, Director at the European Commission's DG Energy, Nicolas González Casares, a Spanish MEP from the Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament, Sam Ayoub, President of the Canada-Europe Economic Chamber, Stijn Carton from the European Climate Foundation, and Pierre Duvieuzard, who was already with us in the previous panel. He's Deputy CEO of GRT Gaz. Thanks to all of you for joining us today. And so let me start straight away with a question to you, Katerina Sikov-Magny. So given the climate objectives that the EU has set for itself in 2030, 2050, what kind of policy measures do you believe are most appropriate to accelerate the transition to decarbonised and renewable gases in the EU's energy mix? The gas industry, for example, believes a target for renewable gas, much like was done for electricity, would be a good idea. So what is your view on that?
Many thanks for the question and good afternoon, everybody. Very pleased to be here today to discuss this very important question. So it's important then to look at, even if the Green Deal gives you the overall framework, where to go, how to go to the decarbonised and carbon neutral economy by 2050, we of course need to plan the path there to in the best way. And the focus on gas in this event today is of prime importance. So what we see today, first of all, is that we are phasing out coal, but that means that perhaps in certain parts of Europe, we may see a little bit more gas, whereas overall gas consumption will be reduced by 66 to 71% as compared to 2015. So that is a considerable decrease. we need to then look into how to get renewable and low carbon gases into the system, because despite of electrification, we still do need molecules in our energy system, meaning then biogas, biomethane, hydrogen, and synthetic methane. So the demand for these gases grows. They are currently at relatively low level in our mix, but we will need to bring them higher up and need to ensure that they are both renewable, low carbon, and sustainable at the same time. So what do we intend to do? Well, you have all seen the policy aim increased in terms of reducing carbon emissions to 55% that the Commission proposed last autumn. So we are now working on implementing this in practice. By summer, we will propose a revision of the emission trading scheme and the Renewable Directive, as well as the Energy Efficiency Directive. So this package will tell what we intend to do, be it then in the renewable sector overall or gases sector on the other hand. This will be followed up by end of the year with proposals on how to make the current gas market up to speed for the new gases. It is still too early, and I must disappoint you here, to say whether we need targets for the different gases or in different sectors. What is sure at this moment, as we speak, is that we will need a higher target for renewables overall, but we are currently consulting on how to implement this in practice. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Katerina Sikov-Magni. Just one point of clarification. The revision of the gas directives will not be included in the June package, the so-called Fit for 55 package. It will be for later on in the year, correct?
Yeah, by the end of the year, together with methane legislation as well.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Casares, same question to you very briefly. What do you think is the right policy mix to get decarbonised and renewable gases off the ground?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you loud and clear. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this important panel. I think that we have to discuss a very important topic in the EU energy policy. Here in EU, we are discussing how to achieve this in the most cost-effective way. We have several strategies: the energy sector integration, the hydrogen strategy, the renovation wave, and a key proposal for the regulation of the energy infrastructure, the TEN-E regulation. I think that here, clean gas has an important role to play and also an important place in our discussion. From an energy system integration perspective, there is a need for a coherent approach across sectors for infrastructure planning. There should be good coordination between gas and electricity plants. We can see from the different impact assessments that there is a significant potential for renewable gases and especially renewable hydrogen. But of course, we can think in other gases. Of course, we can think in biofuels such as biogas. One of the objectives of the Commission's energy sector integration strategy is to achieve a more circular energy system, and I also believe in that. I would like to highlight the role of agriculture and its potential in mitigating its emission through biogas production. The methane emission. Waste can effectively reduce methane emissions. It can also generate additional revenue streams for farmers and provide opportunities for development and investment in rural areas. Hydrogen. I think this is the star of the moment. About synthetic fuels, the hydrogen strategy is one of the pillars of the energy integration strategy, since a career such as clean hydrogen will be necessary to decarbonize the sectors where direct electrification is not possible. To this end, it is essential to start by clarifying the different types of hydrogen, as well as establishing standards that clarify its characteristics and origin. I believe that it's necessary to prioritize gases produced with renewable energy, green gases, to be consistent with our climate neutral objectives. It's also an industrial opportunity for the EU. I think that on the necessary associated infrastructure, planning is essential to avoid any further locking from fossil fuel infrastructure, and sunk investments are essential. Here, the taxonomy regulation will be of great help. So will the 10-year review, where the Commission proposal includes the investment in hydrogen infrastructure, smart grids, but it must match these new categories with the objective that natural gas infrastructure are no longer eligible for the project common infrastructure status. I would like to conclude by saying that with the Next Generation EU and the Recovery and Resilience Facility, we have an opportunity to boost these technologies and processes for the future, to be competitive and to win the career to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Casares. Samayub, turning to you now with the same question, essentially. What do you think is the right policy mix to encourage the take-up of renewable and low-carbon gases in the EU?
Yes, hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And it's an important question, and I think to respond directly to your question, we need a total mix. And this mix will evolve through times until 2030, 2040, and 2050 to reach those ambitious goals, objective to be neutral in 2050. So we will need, hydroelectricity, wind power, solar power, renewable gas, along with in the near future hydrogen. So we need all this. Just to point out and to put things in context, on my side, I'm not an expert on renewable energy. And as you've mentioned, I'm the president of the Canada-Europe Economic Chamber. So promoting trades between Canada and the European Union or Europe, and those trades can take shape as partnerships that will lead to projects either in Canada, in Europe, or all over the world. So in that matter, I would just want to read some fact sheets and put things in perspective as we're talking about climate change here and the goals of 2050 for many places in the world. So the first thing is that there is no border for climate change. So we're living into a global reality. Horizon 2050 in Europe means 10 to 15% less CO2 emissions in the world. So that corresponds to more or less all the landfills methane emissions in Africa as of today, just to give you a sense of level. Between now and 2050, other parts of the world are and will be an important economic growth period. Think of Asia, including China, India, and Africa, with South Africa and Ethiopia, by example, which with high needs of energy sources. Waste to energy plants are not reusing or recycling waste, but help replace other form of power using fossil fuels. Reducing waste, reduce methane emission, and RNG reduces the use of other sources of fossil fuels, not waste. just to point that out. RNG is an efficient solution to reach not only Horizon 2050 objectives, but to export the technology and savoir-faire to other parts of the world with high or potentially high CO2 emissions. I'm thinking about Africa here. RNG is, as we're talking about 2050, is a long time from now. It's for 30 years from now. So Africa in 30 years will take shape in a very important manner. RNG is possible where there is a demand for energy, a competitively priced project supported by secure long-term waste supply and appropriate risk allocation. There are challenges. Some EU countries have overinvested in burning facilities and are then locked into long-term contract, 40 to 50 years, with the incinerators that demand a constant flow of waste on a 24-hour basis to keep operating. On top of that, the trends will go towards zero waste management. So we've got to have some thought about that, I think. We know more about solar, wind, or hydro, but RNG is a coming out industry. It is 10 to 15 years behind the first three renewable energy growth curve, but there is a big push on to deploy globally and large amount of capital flow. So there is a business opportunity here for Canadians and Europeans to invest and to achieve some things here in Europe or Canada or anywhere else in the world. RNG represents 1% of total natural gas today, and also sunlight and wind are very diluted fuels that need a very large land mass in order to produce significant amount of electricity, not RNG. So there's an advantage here. And for a conclusion, RNG needs to have sustainable and viable solutions for now and the future, not only for Europe, Canada, or California, but also for Asia and Africa. Altogether, Horizon 2050 set an example to be followed, but also represent an opportunity to export the technologies and the savoir-faire to the rest of the world to really combat global climate change.
Thank you, Sam Ayoub. Let me turn to Stijn Garton now from the European Climate Foundation. There's obviously quite a lot of interest from the gas industry to push for targets for renewable gas, whether biomethane or hydrogen. What, in your view, is the right policy mix to get those gases off the ground? And do you believe that a target could be a good idea to achieve this?
Yeah, and hi everyone, and thanks for inviting me to speak at this panel. I think it's a really great time to be discussing this really important moment as we look at the legislative agenda at the EU level. I lead the ECF's work on gas infrastructure, so I'll just give you my perspective as well as share with you some insights from recent pieces of analysis that we commissioned, which look at precisely these sort of questions in terms of, what is the future role of gas in the energy system? What are the future energy infrastructure needs? Now, before we delve into sort of the policy design question, though, I do think it's really important that we start from a sort of common understanding in terms of what the future role of gas, or, well, really molecules, is going to be in the energy system. And that is one where really the future role of those molecules is going to be very different from the role of natural gas in the system today. I can point you to really most of the credible analysis that is out there in the field essentially paints this picture of renewable gas being a premium fuel. It's going to be scarce. It's going to be expensive. And so what that means in terms of its contribution to decarbonization essentially is that it's going to have to be reserved for sectors where it can really provide the greatest added value. And generally speaking, the sectors we're then looking at are primarily industry use, shipping. There might be some peak demand in the power sector very late in the 2040s, 2050s, but that's really, I think, where the bulk of, let's say, renewable gas demand is going to be situated, or rather where it makes most sense to use that. And that is a very different end use picture from natural gas today, because, as you know, 40% or more, 45% of natural gas demand today is actually in the building sector. So that very different sort of picture of the role of gas in the system, I think, is just a really important starting point in terms of the implications for EU energy and energy infrastructure policy. So if you then get into this policy question, I think what that really means, and what's really important here is, of course, is that we start from this baseline of, okay, we need by 2050 in line with the European Union's carbon neutrality objective, we will need to phase out natural gas by 2050 at the latest. Katerina already mentioned also by 2030, we already have a very steep challenge in terms of reducing gas demand by about 30% as well. And the way we're going to be doing that primarily really is going to be through energy efficiency and electrification, first and foremost. These are for buildings, for transport, for parts of the industry sector as well. These are going to be, let's say, the bulk solution for decarbonisation, because that's where the cost is lowest. That's where they make most sense. And it's only really then that I think you get into this question of, well, what is then the role of renewable gases? And that is an important complementary role, but it's not, let's say, the bulk solution like electrification, energy efficiency is going to be. And so I think what's going to be really important in terms of policy design is that you look to implement targeted policies that phase in, for example, green hydrogen use in industrial sectors where also in 2050, that's where the demand is going to be. So we need to think about targeted policies to not only bring down the cost of electrolyzers, but also, for example, create demand in industrial sectors. And the most logical place to start is actually existing hydrogen demand in industry. We have about 8 million tons of fossil hydrogen being used as a chemical feedstock in industry today. Just to put that in perspective, the Commission's hydrogen strategy of about 40 gigawatts of electrolyzers by 2030, that nets you about 10 million tons of green hydrogen production. So that's essentially, all of the hydrogen you're going to be producing by 2030, the logical place to be putting that towards is in replacing that fossil hydrogen demand. And it's only then really that you can start thinking about, okay, well, what do we do with the additional green hydrogen that's going to be produced? And then you can think about steel making, you can think about other chemical feedstocks and so on. But that is really already going to be a major challenge for the EU, I think, to get to that number by 2030. And that's, I think, where we need to start about. So to end maybe on that question of, do we need targets? Well, actually, if I can be quite frank, I don't think blending targets of any sort are a targeted policy intervention that would be suitable in terms of bringing hydrogen demand to the sectors that need it most. I don't think putting 2, 3, 4% of hydrogen in residential buildings is going to achieve anything in terms of aiding decarbonisation, because that is not a sector where hydrogen is ultimately going to be playing a major role. So thanks very much. I think I'll pause there.
Thank you, Sten Carton. Let me turn to Pierre Duviezard then for views on the right policy mix, which in your view would be best fitted to encourage the take-up of these decarbonised and low-carbon gases. Sten Carton really insisted on the fact that it should be reserved for very specific sectors. Is that a view that you share as well?
Well, thank you, Frederick. And to answer your question, I would like to briefly come back on the experience that we have on the development of biomethane in France. That has proven to be quite successful over the last year. More than 200 biogas plants are injecting biomethane into the gas grid, and we expect a strong growth in the coming years. More than 1,100 projects are in the portfolio, representing about 24 terawatt hours of capacity. And it's a combination of 4 key success factors that have fostered the development of biomethane. First, France set a target in the energy law with regards to injection of renewable gases. This is just a subject we've been discussing a few minutes ago. And 10% of gas consumption by 2030 is the objective, with an intermediate objective of 8 terawatt hours to be injected in the grid by 2023. Second, incentive to production and usages have been introduced. Feed-in tariffs and guarantees of origins have been set up, allowing relatively small facilities to develop and inject their production into the grids, and tax incentives to foster the use of biomethane in transport. Third, access to existing infrastructure have been simplified via socialization into grid tariffs of the investment cost to connect the biomethane facilities to the transmission or distribution system, and also because gas operators have made available capacity register to give visibility to project promoters on the locations that are the most suitable to connect their projects. And four, last but not least, biomethane producers have access to a well-functioning gas market and to a well-developed infrastructure. So, in order to foster the development of renewable and low-carbon gases, and we will come later to the benefit and uses of these gases, but we would suggest 3 key policy priorities. 1, political messaging on the long-term outlook for renewable and low-carbon gases in the EU's energy system is important. It should recognize and value all environmental and economic benefits linked to renewable gas production and uses. And unambiguous political support is indeed needed, provided, of course, that bioenergy is done right under the right sustainability. And so we'll come back to the other subjects later. Otherwise, investors might shy away and prevent EU from being a valuable and affordable solution for decarbonisation. The second policy priority is, and I'll come back to that, specific targets to foster the decarbonisation. Based on our experience in France that I've just shared, we support Gas for Climate proposal to include an 11% binding target for renewable gases in 2030. And 3, clear definitions of renewable and low carbon gases in EU-wide system for guarantees of origin that will allow to give clarity to stakeholders that are willing to invest in those technologies. I could also develop other priorities like CO2 prices, life cycle assessment methodology, and of course the recent proposal of ACER and CER regarding the regulation of hydrogen, but we will come to these subjects later in the discussion.
Thank you, Pierre Duvesard. Let me quickly follow up on one of the points that you raised about guarantees of origins, because this is something that was raised in the past and by other speakers as well, is the need to be able to certify the origin of the gases, how they were produced. There are many different ways of obtaining hydrogen, as you all know, the different colors of it. And the same goes for biomethane. There are different routes of obtaining biomethane, and corresponding to those, the carbon intensity and the environmental footprint can be quite different. So maybe I will put that question to you, Mrs. Sikov-Magny. Do you believe there is a case now at the EU level to harmonize the way guarantees of origin are being shaped? Currently, it's more or less left to the market to decide. Is there a need there for harmonization? And maybe why not making those certificates of origin mandatory at some point in Europe? Mrs. Sikov-Magny.
Question, it's important indeed. But if we look at, starting by looking at what we have already achieved under the Renewable Energy Directive, so there the certification system has already shown good results in certifying feedstock and fuels and applying a life cycle approach. So currently, what we cover under this certification process, it is mainly biogas and biomethane. And further implementation of the directive will bring green hydrogen also as part of the process, as it is used in transport, among others. So this will certainly be something important for the market. But applying those methods to the assessment of the environmental footprint of gases would allow to ensure thorough certification, through certification that only gases that comply with the minimum threshold of emission savings related to their production can be sustainably used and, importantly, account towards our climate targets. But we will indeed need to look at how to complement this certification with consumer information, which can be then provided through guarantees of origin. And these kind of guarantees of origin could include information on the associated carbon footprint of the gases that we are talking about. And overall, we consider that consumers must be provided with the information that they can take best choices on what to purchase, and so that the market signals are appropriate. This of course brings the question of traceability to the table. So it is important to bring closer the supply and demand in this area, which is very important. So we are currently working on a union database for liquid and gaseous fuels in the transport sector. It is one of the legal obligations of the Renewable Directive. So this is already going in the first step in the direction of providing the adequate information and traceability. But we will certainly reflect again in the process of further working on the recast of the directive on how to bring more transparency and traceability by extending the coverage, which could be heating and cooling, for instance, or power production. So all, again, issues are on the table, and certainly we will look into those. And again, you will see by summer when we table the legal proposals how far we indeed want it to go. Thanks.
Thank you. Steenkaarten, maybe you'd like to react here about the need for greater traceability. It seems that from what I understand from Mrs. Sikov-Magni's comments, that there will be some form of initiative at EU level to provide for greater traceability. It's something that the industry is actually calling for. How, in your view, should this be, shaping up on the policy and regulatory level? What would be your recommendations there?
Yeah, thanks. I don't know if I can go as far as to make specific recommendations, but certainly I can echo the comments made as to the importance of traceability on this matter. I think what we really need very, very urgently, I think, around the Renewable Energy Directive or around the gas package at the end of the year, is indeed this sort of framework with clear definitions for the different gases. So we need to go beyond the color scheming that is currently the color schemes that are currently being used. But I would like to mention maybe also one other particular important point of intervention, and that is around the Renewable Energy Directive sustainability criteria, where I'm not certain whether there's any plans to have that opened up at this stage. But certainly, if we're talking biomethane, what would be really important there as well is that we actually make the criteria for biomethane, sustainable biomethane, more stringent. And I can point you to the fact that half of current biomethane currently produced in the EU is actually derived from food and feed crops like silage maize, which means that they offer very little, if any, greenhouse gas savings over standard methane, right, over natural gas. So I do think if the industry is serious about scaling up the production of biomethane, and it was alluded to the Biogas Done Right project, for example, I do think it's really important also at the European level that we make those criteria more stringent, so that, for example, indirect land use emissions are taken into account as well, and that we don't just look at the direct emissions. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Steenkaarten. Let me now ask Mr. Casares for a reaction on this. You did mention, I think, also the need for greater transparency and traceability of the different types of gases. Is that something that you'll be supporting in the European Parliament? And do you have any thoughts maybe to share on this?
Of course. I agree absolutely that the guarantees of origin can help expand the market. As I said, to decarbonize the gas sector, it is essential the clarification of the different types of clean gases, as well as establishing standards that clarify its characteristics and origin. This clarification should be based on a common legal classification of the different types of gases, including hydrogen. To decarbonize the gas sector, I think to reform the guarantees of origin system to eliminate the loopholes in the RED II that avoid that use them. Of course, I think the guarantees of origin, not only in the gas sector, in every kind of energy, we can see that it's not only a problem also for the climate goals and the climate objectives. I think that we need also to the traceability as a problem in our relationship with other countries in our climate commitments. I think also important. We have a discussion in last plenary in the Parliament about it's nothing related, nothing linked with the gas sector, or yes, maybe linked, about the nuclear power plant in Belarus. The difficult to know how the electricity comes from gas or the nuclear production in Belarus, because the Baltic countries import their electricity from Russia, and they don't know the traceability of the nuclear power plant that was under discussion. So I think it's not only a problem of climate goals, it's also a problem how to deal with third countries. We know that also in Spain about other technologies.
Thank you, Mr. Casares. Turning to Sam Ayoub, very quickly about this issue of traceability. Is that something that you would support as the president of the Canada-Europe Economic Chamber, or is it something you believe will, be hampering trade between Canada and the European Union if there's greater traceability of how the gases are produced?
Yes, I think it makes sense. I mean, to have a certain level of evaluation to figure the evaluation method to figure if we reach our objective, and if we reach the objective in 2025, 2030, 2040, and then ultimately 2050. So to have an evaluation is just very important. So we do support that. Also, I would like to say or point out that doing, from what I understand, renewable energy with gas. It's just the benefits of doing that is, switching or, to change from fossil fuels into renewable gas. So it's not from natural gas to renewable gas. There's not much gain there, but from fossil fuels, that's where there's the gain. So I just want to point out that in order to reach the goals, ambitious goals again in 2030 and 2050.
Okay, thank you very much, Sam Ayoub. We're getting closer now to the end of this panel, so maybe we'll wrap up with some reflections about regulatory approaches. And there was an interesting report published last week by the energy regulators, the European Agency for Energy Regulators, which basically called for a dynamic approach, regulatory approach to hydrogen networks. Mrs. Sakovmani, what is your reaction to this report? Do you also believe that a dynamic approach to regulation is needed when it comes to hydrogen and maybe also biomethane?
Thanks indeed. It was very interesting read from the regulators on this approach, how to regulate hydrogen networks. What the paper does, it endorses the principle of flexibility by proposing the dynamic regulation of the hydrogen markets. And the inspiration comes very much from the telecoms markets and their regulation. So in this framework, the regulators using market tests can then choose interventions from a preset list of issues or regulations if problems arise. I would certainly agree that we should consider a gradual approach that needs to have a built-in flexibility because there are still quite some uncertainties on how the market will develop, how it will evolve from the industrial clusters to a European market possibly, and when. But before we can answer on whether we should go for this kind of a dynamic regulation or something different, I think we need to explore a couple of further questions. For instance, what criteria should apply to decide when and where and when regulatory interventions should be sought? Or which regulatory interventions should apply in which circumstances, or what relevant markets may need consideration. So these are the elements that we will look at to implement the hydrogen strategy, and we need to have clarity on these questions that I just mentioned before jumping on what Acer has or Acer and CER have proposed. Interesting areas, ideas, of course, but we also have to keep in mind that certain member states are already contemplating the introduction of regulatory measures in their territory. So it must be also taken into account, and we must be then ready to look into what kind of a market we want to see, instead of then seeing member states going their own way and then maybe creating something which is not compatible in the end. So this as a rapid reaction to the report.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Casares, some very brief from your end about Acer's proposal to have a dynamic regulation of hydrogen networks. Is that also something you believe is actually necessary? Mr. Casares, maybe you're muted.
Yes, I'm muted because not to disturb you when you are talking, when you're speaking. Thank you. As one of the main concerns is avoid any further lock-in from fossil fuels infrastructure and sunk investment, in particular in new fossil gas infrastructure, I believe in the recommendation by Acer for a dynamic regulatory approach. I think that the geography of biogas and hydrogen is likely to be very different from the existing natural gas corridors and infrastructure. So I agree with the recommendation. As the hydrogen strategy highlights, blending is less efficient and diminishes the value of hydrogen. I think also blending changes the quality of the gas consumed in Europe and may affect the design of gas infrastructure and user application and cross-border system interoperability, with the risk of fragmenting the internal market. So I think that we need to take into account these recommendations and, of course, be dynamic, but of course, know the limits that we have not to cause further lock-in in future.
Thank you, Mr. Casares. Pierre Duviozard, I will turn to you for your final thoughts on the regulatory approach and the report that Acer published last week calling for a dynamic regulation of hydrogen infrastructure. Is that also something that you would support?
Yes, we've of course read this white paper with a lot of interest. We've discussed already the concept of a gradual approach. Maybe I will just highlight two different recommendations from this white paper. The first is the clarity on regulatory principle from the outset, and we also think this is very important for the development of hydrogen and the regulation of hydrogen. And I would add here the issues of interoperability provision and also the standardization of hydrogen quality, which will be important for the development of hydrogen. And also the fifth recommendation, where the Acer values the benefits of repurposing of gas assets for hydrogen transport, which includes a first step, the role of the NDPs, National Development Plans of gas networks operators, that could be extended to identify also assets that could be converted to hydrogen. And here, I would like to insist on the coordinated planning exercise that could start now. Why wait? It could start now. And also that it should or it could include reflections on dedicated hydrogen network. And I think if we go in this direction, it could help development of hydrogen.
Thank you, Pierre Duviozard. I think this brings this online event to its conclusion. Thanks again to all the speakers for joining us today. Thanks to the four companies for supporting it, and to our viewers for following this event online. We will be organising more of these online events in the coming months, especially as we see the proposals coming out of the European Commission with the June package, and then later on this year when it comes to gas. So stay tuned and hope to see you again very soon. Bye-bye.